The South African Statistics Council has threatened to resign if Stats SA does not receive more funding and fill frozen posts. The council is an advisory body that endorses the release of data by Statistics South Africa. Now, the council's chairperson, Professor David Everatt, says Stats SA is at a tipping point and government needs to act swiftly. Professor David Everatt joins us via Skype now here in Johannesburg. Prof, thank you very much for your time. Firstly, what are the reasons for funding not being not forthcoming?
Your guess is possibly as good as mine, probably better. We've spent a lot of time asking government and pleading behind closed doors. And in every meeting, I have to say, we've had a really warm reception. People have understood the value of Stats SA, but that never seems to translate into money flowing into the institution.
Yeah.
There have been a couple of, little emergency plug the gap. We've just received one now, which started at 50 million, became 46, became 45. But it always comes with riders attached, namely this one comes with a statement that we must further cut staff when we're already at a 20% vacancy rate. So we don't quite understand the contrast between the warm reception we get with regard to the quality of the statistics that Stats SA produces and the failure to turn that into adequate funding for the body.
Let me ask you this question, Prof. Which department is directly responsible for advancing this funding?
Well, thankfully, it doesn't have a department because Stats SA is an independent entity and it therefore reports to the minister in the presidency.
All right. The question then that is critical for the country is if Statistics SA cannot produce reliable statistics or reliable data, what are the implications for the country?
The problem is we need to separate two things. Firstly, the problem for the country is profound. So if this country lacks approved official statistics, then no one can do any planning because you don't know what the world looks like. Whether you're in the private sector, government, multilateral, corporates from elsewhere, it doesn't matter. You simply don't know what we look like. You don't know what inflation is running at. You don't know what GDP looks like. You don't know what provincial GDP looks like, etc. And so we're in the dark, frankly, without Stats SA producing. And the problem is that Stats SA have maintained, so we're an advisory body that signs off on the official statistics that the Statistician General puts forward. If we withdraw our support, even though they continue to produce the statistics they're able to on the budget they've got, those statistics don't have official sanction. At that point, you have to inform the IMF, to whom we're a reporting agency, Stats, UN Stats, African Stats, and I'm afraid at that point, the impact on the economy will be quite profound. And that's the very worst option for us. And that's the last thing we want to happen, is that, for example, the ratings agencies just pull up their socks and disappear, and it hits the ordinary person in the street, of which we are people as well. And so we're really trying to say to government, you have an agency that is still producing high-quality statistics, but is now being stretched to the point where we know that at some point human error, if nothing else, is going to affect those stats. And you don't wait for there to be a catastrophe before you plug the hole. You plug the hole in order to avoid any catastrophe happening.
Professor Everatt, you pose a very serious question in your press release, and that is why a respected and reliable institution like the council that you run is seemingly being punished by government while those deeply implicated in state capture are receiving massive bailouts almost on a daily. Is that the feeling you get, that you're being punished by government?
I have to tread warily because I'm simultaneous. Okay, so firstly, the money isn't coming to council. Let me just clear that. The money is for Stats SA. We don't get any money. I think we get a web page, which is rather lovely. So we're trying to secure the funds for them. I think historically this goes back to what, under the previous regime, what was perceived as criticism coming from the former Statistician General turned into a form of both taking money out of our budget and freezing all posts and promotions as a form of punishment for dare I say, daring to criticize government policy, which at some level can be seen as beyond the remit of the statistician general. And on the other hand, if your statistics keep telling you that unemployment is rising, that the youth are in crisis, and you say so, it's a thin-skinned government that says, you've overstepped your mark and we're going to punish you. But yes, our sense is very strongly that we're asking for 250 million rand. For you or I, that's a lot of money. But in terms of the 1.4 billion that's just been given to PRASA, the successive billions that are going to SAA, let's not even mention Eskom, what we're asking for is pretty small beer. And yet that they refuse to do. And we're now saying we've run on goodwill and innovation and cutting sample sizes and all the rest of it for 5 years now. And it's simply not sustainable any longer. Any
indications, as a final question to you, whether this money is going to come through anytime soon?
As I say, every time we talk to anyone in government, we get lots of lovely support and sympathy, for which we're all truly appreciative. But there is no indication that that is going to turn into, and it's not even a large check, into a check for 250 million rand, lifting the freeze on posts and saying Stats SA go and run for it. And I'd say one last warning. We're preparing a Stats SA for Census 2021. There's a large fieldwork budget for that. But if there is no Stats SA staff on the ground in the institution to analyze the data, to run the post-enumeration survey, to tell us what it all means, government may feel they're giving us a lot of money, 3 billion, to run a survey, to run the census, forgive me, but you need to have an institution there to actually run the census. And at this point, we're going to have census data and almost no one left to analyze us or tell us what it means.
It's a very, very desperate situation. Thank you very much, Professor David Everatt, the chairperson of the South African Statistics Council.